Hey guys, it's Carey Flamer Powell, host of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast. So I wanted to just do a little preface to this upcoming episode to let you know that this is the most personal episode I've ever done. It's with one of the moms that I cared for as a surrogate as we go through our stories from each of our perspectives of our journey together. And I just wanted to let you know that it's a super special episode, and I really hope you enjoy listening to she and I talk about all the things that led us to find each other and be able to do this amazing journey together. So enjoy. Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Carey Flamer Powell, experienced gestational surrogate, surrogacy agency founder, and owner of Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor. Today, I am joined by my very special guest, someone I know and love very dearly, Nicole, one of the moms I carry for as a gestational surrogate. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. This is awesome.
This is awesome.
So
almost a decade later, we're now finally talking about it publicly, which is awesome.
It's crazy, right? To think that it doesn't feel like it's been that long.
No, It feels like it was yesterday, and it feels like it was a decade ago, all at the same time.
I know.
I can't believe he is going to be 10 years old this year. That's insane. So
it is. I don't know that I'm ready for the double digits. So.
Well, I am so excited to talk to you about your perspective as, we say, intended parent, but now you're just a parent. But your experience coming to the point in your life where you realized, wow, I'm going to need to work with a surrogate to have a family. So why don't you take us back to the beginning and tell me about where you were in your life when you started to plan your family and what those options looked like for you.
Molly and I started dating when I was 30, and I had always known that I'd wanted kids. The fact that I also knew I was gay was, in my mind, it was maybe something that would be an inconvenience as far as like we'd have to go through something extra, but it wasn't any kind of question in my mind ever that I wanted kids. I knew that. And that was something that I was it was like probably a conversation on one of the first 2 or 3 dates. Like, hey, just FYI, I really want kids. If it's something, that you don't want to do, we probably should talk about that now.
Right.
Because she was 5 years older. And I think she had been kind of indifferent about it. Like if it happened, fine, but just assumed that she wouldn't because she was gay and did not have strong feelings about it either way, really. Right. And so she was like, okay, well, if it's important to you, then great. And then we didn't feel any kind of rush to do anything about it at that point in time, obviously. So about, I guess after we've been dating 3 or 4 years and she was getting closer to the age where menopause and could potentially start, it's like, yeah, you know what? We should probably go ahead and freeze our eggs or freeze her eggs. And so we went through that process, start that process. And when we did, we found out that it was way better to freeze an embryo than freeze eggs.
Right.
And we had thought, well, we'll put off the decision on who'll be the sperm donor until later. And then we realized, no, we got to make that decision now. So we did that and decided on who our sperm donor would be. And then we froze her eggs, knowing we weren't ready to have kids, but we wanted to kind of solidify the option. Right. And because I was younger, we did hers first. And then as we got a few years past, the assumption was always that I would carry. That was the assumption. And so when we got closer into where we decided we wanted to start trying, and I went to the doctor, is when I found out that I could not carry.
Okay.
And that was was like, what? And we knew she could not carry as well because she had had a kidney transplant. And so we knew that, but we always assumed that I would be able to carry. And so when we found out I couldn't, it's like, okay, well, what's the next option? And of course, surrogacy, gestational carrier is the option for that.
Mm-hmm.
And but we had no clue to even how to begin to go about that process. So we went and talked to an agency, and it just felt that part. There was something about that process that felt impersonal, even though it's probably not meant to be, and it wasn't a judgment on it. It was just maybe probably because it was just such a new thing for us.
Sure.
And then the expense of realizing, oh, we're going to have to do IVF for me as well now. We had not anticipated that.
Mm-hmm.
So went through that process to try to go ahead and see if I could even retrieve anything, which the doctors advised not to even try, that I would have such a low rate. He was like, it's your money if you want to try, but it wasn't recommended that it would be successful or that I would get very many eggs. And I did not get very many eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up doing 2 rounds of IVF each, 2 for her and 2 for me. And then I have a friend that's a lawyer, and I was talking to her one day, and she said, you probably can do this independently, that is an option. I didn't even know that was an option.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, how do you do that? And she said, they're literally like, start Googling. There's message boards and websites where people post, and you just start the process. And if you find somebody that you think it works, then I'll sign up, I'll do the paperwork for you, and we'll go from there.
Right.
And so we basically just felt our way through it until we found you. We had conversations with a surrogate over the phone with another one lady that we had found on a message board, and conversations were happening. And then when it came to either we were going to schedule a time to meet, she ghosted. She just fell off the radar completely for whatever reason. Still to this day, don't know what happened. So then we were like, well, okay, let's start looking again. And we didn't know if it was because we were gay. We didn't know why she had ghosted. So we decided, you know what, instead of looking for other people's who've got listed, other surrogates, we'll actually put our own up there. And that way, anything that would potentially be an issue, they won't contact us because they'll read it. So that's what we did. We did a post, and if I'm remembering this correctly, and yeah, and then we got a message from you. And the rest is history.
The rest is history. Okay. So a couple of things. So one, I don't think I realized that you didn't know until you were in this process that you wouldn't be able to carry. I thought you grew up knowing that your medical condition would prevent you from carrying. And so that's a surprise to me 10 years later. I didn't know that you thought you were going to be able to carry all the way up until that point.
No, so the issue had come up like when I was in my late 20s, but I just don't think that I really believed it. I was like, yeah, okay, it would be risky. But when I went and talked to the IVF clinic doctors, anticipating that I would do a transfer, they were like, no, for real. Like,
got it. Like,
this is
dangerous.
We're not going to tell you that, we're not refusing to do it, but we would only do it. Like, you're going to actually, they may have said that they would not feel comfortable doing it, that I probably could find somebody that would, but if there was an option, I should not.
Got it.
We were financially in a place where we were like, well, we would rather just save and go through the financial hardship of it versus taking that risk.
Right.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah.
So let's back up. So when you guys got to the point where you put a post out on the internet, so this is back in the old days, by the way, this is 2012.
Yeah.
This is the old days of surrogacy because it's changed a lot. So back in those days, Facebook groups existed for finding matches, but they weren't as prominent as they are now. And the way that a lot of people independently found each other was a website called Surromoms Online. And so on the other side of that coin, I had also been interviewing with agencies and felt like it just was not a good fit for me to work with an agency, which is ironic because I started an agency later in my life, but that's another story. I also didn't feel it was a good match. So I was going out looking for independent matches as well and found that same website. And so the way the website works is you can post as a parent or a surrogate what you're looking for, what you're hoping for, all that. It's like a dating site, right? Like, here's who I am.
Exactly.
If you're interested in what you see on this profile, contact me. And so the way it was set up back then was posts could only be up for 30 days at a time, and then they had to be renewed. And so I remember going in and typing in gay or lesbian. That was my filter word. I wanted to find gay or lesbian couple to carry for. I was married to a woman at the time. It was really important to me that I help another family that was gay or lesbian. And I had been talking to a couple gay men, but it just wasn't a good fit. So then I typed in the word lesbian one day and one post came up. And it was actually technically expired. It was beyond the 30 days. It shouldn't have still been up, but for whatever reason it was. And that was you guys. And I was like, these guys sound perfect. And they sound like the exact thing I'm looking for. And so we ended up on the phone like pretty quickly after that, right? Talking on the phone.
Yeah, I think we talked very quickly after you found the post. I feel like you called or emailed probably within the day or so of finding it. And yeah, and it was funny because I had never imagined in a million years that I would, we'd get contacted by somebody who, was also with a woman. So that was, I was like, what are the chances of that? I mean, I recognize the unicorn aspect of, well, that's quirky. And, there was a questionnaire that we had, drawn up or developed or however we'd gotten it. And we sent that to you. You filled that questionnaire out. And then I think we talked after you filled the questionnaire out because I remember reading it and going, she's perfect in like every way except for geography.
Right. Because we were on
I was
opposite
like,
coasts.
we could not be further apart in the, the map. I'm like, how? And that felt so scary, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, the process is scary in and of itself, and then you're gonna be separated for the 9 months of it. Felt so strange. But in my mind, I thought, if everything else is exactly what I had hoped for, how can I let geography be what dictates this?
Right.
So once we FaceTimed, so I think the next thing that happened is that you came out here for us all to meet in person, and then for you to, get checked out by the doctors and all that good stuff. And we did that. I feel like it was probably within a few months of meeting. We had to do all the fun paperwork, start that process. And so I think you guys came out here and we all met in person, which was awesome. And also, it's a unique experience, right? You don't have anything else like it prior to that. You don't have anything else like it afterwards. It is a unique experience. And so I didn't know what to expect. I think I was mostly like, God, I just hope we like each other. Because in my mind, it was like that. I know that some people don't feel the need to have, a friendship, and they can kind of keep it very business-esque. And that probably is fine for some people, but that was not what I had hoped. I had hoped that that's just not my personality either.
Right.
That would have seemed too transactional, and it was such a special thing that I didn't want it to seem transactional, even though I knew it was. I knew there was a transactional, contract and all that stuff component of it. I wanted to not let that be what was the feeling.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the connection was important for all of us. And it was important that be there, especially for an independent journey when you don't have the buffer of an agency or other people. Like everything is just between all of us. Right. And when I say all of us, so there was you and your partner, and then there was me and my now ex-wife. So my ex-wife and I flew out to where you were, which was, like you said, the whole other side of the country. And we spent a couple of days there because we had to do all of our medical tests and, blood tests. And all of us had a meeting with the psychologist and did all of those things and got to meet each other and spend some time. And that's when, for me, it was like, yes, this is the right match. This all feels great. And so I remember at that point, the plan with the doctors was Molly had frozen 4 embryos using her eggs at that point.
Right.
At this point, you actually hadn't gone through IVF yourself yet. So
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
it was just the 4 that had been previously frozen. And they had decided those are the ones we're going to work with first and see how it goes. So we did the medication, we did the lawyers, all that stuff, got everything set up. And then I did the medication. And then we did a transfer in 2013 and early 2013, and it did not work. It was a failed transfer. Nothing, despite transferring, again, everyone listening, this is the Wild West old days of surrogacy. This never happens anymore. We had 4 embryos, 3 survived the thaw, and we transferred all 3. Right? Or did we transfer all 4? I can't, we did an absurd number because at that time the doctor said the chances of any of these taking is so low. And I remember they had me sign a piece of paper during the embryo transfer.
That was on the second transfer, I think. I don't remember how many. I feel like they only transferred 2 the first go round, but they did a 3-day transfer instead of a 5-day transfer. At the time, I didn't realize, how low some of the. I'm still, irritated. The IVF doctors could be could set better expectations, I think, sometimes, but it's also not in their financial interest to do so.
Sure.
So they had not been as open with us about the low chances. They had not told us or given us any kind of grades for the embryos that would have led us to believe that this was a low likelihood. Because if they had have, we would have gone ahead and done IVF, my IVF and her IVF again before bringing you the first time. Right. I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so, but of course, anyway, so then that doesn't take, and then I realized, became more educated afterwards that, well, yeah, that doesn't mean, it's not meant to be. The chances of that were low for a variety of reasons. And okay, well, let's now go and do it again. So she did another round, and then I did 2 rounds back to back in order to us to get the next batch, whatever batch that would be. And then, and begged you to wait, because we said, we're going to do all this immediately right now, but it's still going to be 9 months or whatever it ended up being. Probably, I guess.
Well, it was
maybe less than a year.
It was 6-month break in between because there was a death in your family as well.
That's right. I forgot about that.
You had to attend to. And then we were into the holidays, but you guys ended up going through your IVF together during the holidays and almost killing each other, right?
Yeah. That I don't advise that. We came out of it unscathed as far as no physical violence, but I'm sure there were some plates that met their demise with 2 women, because they were putting us on. They did put us on, for me for sure, the maximum hormones they could give somebody, because I had such a low number. That in order to get my body to give anything, they needed to do the maximum hormones that I could give.
Oh my gosh.
And so then we're basically on them at the same time, overlapping, and then do 3 retrievals. So in between you coming out, we did 3 retrievals and 3 full rounds of IVF. In less than a year. So
it was a lot. And that break for me was really hard too, because as a surrogate, especially when you have a transfer that fails, you're like, I just want to make this happen for them. I just want to bring some good news, and to have to sit and wait was so hard, but we didn't have any choice. You guys were out of embryos and there's nothing you can do. Right. So that was hard, but we stuck through it. We stayed in touch. We stayed in communication. And the cool thing about that time that I remember was that my ex-wife had a job where she was going to the city where you were quite often for business. And so she got to spend time with you guys and get to know you on her own, which was cool.
Yeah.
And you and
And I
I
think too, for you, you knew that we were not like just hanging out waiting. It wasn't like we were just saving money and say, oh, well, we'll start again. Like I think within a month or so, appointments were made. So, and
yeah,
I remember wanting to be very proactive about that because I knew you were waiting on us and I wanted to be mindful of what a gift that was because you didn't have to wait. You could have been like, hey, I'm at a time in my life when I want to do this now. I don't want to put it off for a year. And I would have understood, but I was like, oh man, like we gotta get on it. And so that was why there was a little bit of that hurried, partially because of our ages, but also because we don't want to lose Carey by,
mhm,
waiting around. So,
right.
let's get it going. And I mean, you talk about like, so of course the financial aspect of that was a
Hmm.
lot to undertake in a relatively short period of time.
Hmm.
Um, and it was like, it was kind of like that line from Field of Dreams: "If you build it, they'll come." I mean,
Uh-huh.
I was, in my business doing anything and everything, to try to, get the funds. Um, I was working a lot to try to generate that
Right.
because we were in a hurry. We wanted to
Yeah.
get it going. So
Of
yeah,
course. Yeah. And I think that's an important point for everyone that's listening is that, on both sides of the coin, parents and surrogates, your life is on hold during a surrogacy in a lot of ways. And there are so many factors on both sides that are making it difficult to see like the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes. Like you guys were
Mhm.
up against your age and finances and medical science working or not working. I was 36 by that point, which, you kind of age out really quickly
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
surrogacy world. And so I was like, dang, like I don't know how long this is going to take. I know that I'm committed to them and I don't want to rematch with anybody and I want to stick this out, but how long is too long to wait for someone? And so it was definitely a trying period, but I think that that's why I always tell people that it's so important to match with the right people, that the match feels like a strong bond of friendship from the very beginning, or at least develops into that before you get into the thick of things, because there's going to be bumps in the road, some bigger
Right.
than others, and you got to be committed to that process together as a team. And
Right.
we were.
Yeah,
So,
and and looking back, I think a lot of that was so impactful in the sense that by the time we came out to try it the second time, we all were built up so much of like, oh my god, we really want this to work because I don't know that we knew we had no more eggs, that all that we had gotten was all that we had to use. There was no way we could have. I think that with my last IVF, I think I only got two or three. I mean, it was
mhm,
like even with the maximum, this
right.
was it.
Yeah.
And
And that's not two or three embryos, by the way. That's two or three eggs.
eggs, yeah.
Yeah.
It just so happened that they both took, because that was my issue, is that I had really low quantity, but
Hmm.
my quality numbers were
Right.
showing good. And then so the doctor was like, I don't even think you should go through IVF because your quantity is so low.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it must not be zero, because if it was zero, the quality numbers
Right.
would not be, there would be no quality if there were. And
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, you've got some and they're healthy, but there's just so few of them that
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense from
Putting
financial
yourself
perspective.
through.
And I was like, well,
Yeah.
my money, I know.
Yeah. My money. Well, and I remember you saying this to me, and I have told people this over the years that you said this because it stuck out to me and it reinforced my commitment to the process, which you said, look, I don't know what the end result's going to be of Molly and I going through all this, but I know that we're either going to succeed at this or run out of blood trying. And
Right.
I was like, okay, that is commitment. And I'm going to meet that commitment with the same level of like, we're sticking through this.
And I think a lot of that too is, my sense of, I knew I knew I wanted a baby. I knew I wanted, but I felt like whatever would have been the next thing, whether that would have been adoption or other eggs or whatever that next thing would have been, I think there would have been something. But I wanted to be able to say, you know what, I'm doing it all the way, 100% on this part. And then that way, if it doesn't work out, I can be fully committed to the next, whatever the next thing is, knowing that we did everything and it was not meant to be. Right.
Yep.
And so, yeah. And I still feel like, but when you got here for the second one, I think we had originally scheduled it for the 3-day transfer. And, we got the call that morning. I don't know I guess you got the call, and then you called me and said, they're putting us off for 2 days because they look so good. They want to let them keep going. And in my mind, I'm going, oh God, no. Like, in my mind, I'm like, let's just get them in. Why can't we just get them in? If they're fine, let's just get them in. But it was because there was, I guess, 4, and they didn't want to put 4 in, and they couldn't figure out which of the best were of the 4 yet.
Yeah.
And so when we got there 2 days later, they were like, well, there's a awesome, and there's 2 really good, and then there's 1 maybe. So we want to put 3 in, but don't worry, the chances of getting, triplets is really low, but here, sign this waiver.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So we have to set this scene really quick for people. So we had gotten to the point after the 6-month break and 3 rounds of IVF between the 2 of you. You got to the point where you had a whole 4 embryos from that. And so to give people's perspective, 4 is typically a low number for 1 round of IVF, a low number of embryos. So to go through 3 and still only have 4 embryos was like, we know this is our one last shot. Like, this is it. Mm-hmm. And so I fly to where you are in January of 2014, which was the ice storm. Mm-hmm. A huge ice storm hit. So I'm in the hotel waiting for the call to come in for the transfer. And the clinic calls me and says, I know you were supposed to come in today, but these embryos are growing really well. And back then, they don't really do this so much anymore. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong, but they used to do 3-day transfers a lot. Let the embryos grow for 3 days, then transfer. Now the common practice is let them grow to 5 days. And so they said they're at 3, but they look amazing. Let's let them grow another 2 days. And there's a huge ice storm. I've got my 2-year-old at home, and I'm like, okay, let me make arrangements with the moms to like get the hotel booked for 2 more nights. Like we were scrambling to like rearrange our plans. So we do that. We go in. 2 days later, the embryos look amazing. And like you said, there are 3 that they want to transfer. And we're all a little bit nervous about what if they all take.
Right.
But we sign the paper and we do it because we know like this is our Hail Mary, right? Like this is it.
This was it. And I remember going, gosh, you talk about the perspective, because in my mind, I'm doing the math and I'm going, gosh, well, God, if they split, if one of them splits, right? We're putting in 3. Are we going to be like, I don't want to be a reality show at the end of this, with 6 babies. And they were like, don't worry. The chances of triplets was like 4%. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking about you, because I'm going, she did not want triplets, was not in her mind as to what from a surrogate. You guys, obviously a surrogate knows that's a possibility, but it's not like you're setting out to. So I'm imagining in my mind that would have been, I remember thinking, gosh, Carey's probably like scared to death at the possibility of putting 3 that look good in. Right. It's not like they were saying, hey, we're putting 3 in trying to get 1. They were saying we're putting 3 in that look good.
Yeah.
That was like,
yeah, it made us a little nervous. But
yeah, and it felt like we had to make the decision right then, that morning.
Right there. Yeah, we did. Right. I mean, that was it. So there was a lot on the line. And so we did it. And then 10 days, not even 10 days later, like I go back home that day.
You flew home that day. I remember going, oh my God, I can't believe she's flying home that day. I didn't want you to fly home that day. I don't know what it was. I guess like it was in my mind going, I don't want her to fly. I want her to like go lay somewhere with her legs in the
yeah, with their legs up. Yeah, I know. Some clinics require bed rest, but they are like, no, you can go ahead and go. And so I went home, and like I think it was only like 6 or 7 days later I took a test, and it was super positive, right? So we find out when I go.
You took it early because they told us not to take it for however long. And I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember who I was with, and it was 5 days. It was like you did the transfer on a Monday and you texted me on a Friday.
Yeah.
It was fast.
Quick. It was really quick. Yeah. Yeah, everyone says don't test at home. Every single surrogate tests at home, by the way. We just can't help it. We just
Of
start
course.
peeing on sticks like the day after the transfer. It's just the way it happens.
Yeah, and I love that you kept doing that in the days between that, and I think you weren't going to have your doctor's appointment for, like, for another week,
Right.
maybe, and you kept peeing on the stick for the like days, and so I need to like pull all those photos from them because it were so many of them, and every day the line would get like darker and darker and darker.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah,
So we get to the doctor's appointment and they do the heartbeat ultrasound and we find out we have twins. And then
twins.
how did you guys feel when you heard that news?
I was thrilled personally. I was happy about that. I was overwhelmed, but I was kind of like, well, of course, this would make sense that you go through all this thinking, so few eggs, so few eggs. And the irony of that was like, oh, of course, and twins. But I think I was cautious, even I felt some sense of caution about that even from the beginning, because if you remember when they showed us the babies on the ultrasound, there was one whose heartbeat was like do 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 like,
Yeah.
and it was bigger, and
Yeah.
then the other embryo was still normal, like not a but in average clearly smaller, and had a slightly lower heart rate. And
Hmm.
so I had a sense then, or I think like a idea of, oh, what does that mean? Does that mean
Yeah.
something because one's bigger in the heart rate? And my aunt's a nurse, and I remember asking her, like, and then like doing all the research, right? Like doing all the research.
Mhm.
So yeah, that
Yeah.
was in my mind. And then how I'm trying to remember how far along you were when we lost one of the twins.
It was 10 weeks, and I was actually visiting family and just had the tiniest bit of spotting, like literally not even enough to even mention. I was just the teeny tiniest little spot. But since it's a surrogacy, I was more cautious and knew that I needed to not just keep it to myself.
Right.
So, yeah, long story short, I ended up going to the ER and they couldn't find a second heartbeat. And they sent me back to my doctor. And that's when she confirmed that yeah, the other one just literally stopped growing and now we can't even see it on the ultrasound. So
Right.
there wasn't a like miscarriage or anything like physical that happened other than it just kind of disappeared. And
Right.
that's
Which I
apparently
didn't know at the
normal.
time I guess I've now learned that that's not how it normally goes.
Right.
Normally, if you're that far in, you'll have some pain, or there'll be, or maybe have to do something. There might be something left that your body doesn't just absorb it up. So I think we
Right.
got lucky in that regard.
We got very lucky. I feel like we got really lucky for sure. And then at that point, it was just the one, and the rest of the pregnancy was amazing. Like literally easy and healthy and big, strong child in there kicking the literal crap out of me every day.
I think I was. It took me 3 or 4 months until I could kind of breathe again
Yeah.
after we lost the first embryo, because I did all this research that said
Mhm.
that if you lose one, the chances of you losing the other one are exponentially higher than they otherwise would be. And a lot of that I now know is because, if you've lost one for some kind of genetic issue, then
Right.
a lot of times the second will follow. Um, but and that was why you had to go to the perinatalogist. Remember, I felt like you went to the doctor every week for like 8 months
Right.
or
Yes.
something. And then we bought, I think that's when we bought the heart rate monitor, right, for you to
Mhm.
have at home.
Yep. Yes.
And yeah, so then I think once he was kicking, and everything was progressing appropriately, I could kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah.
um but those 2 or 3 months afterwards were like, oh,
Yeah.
this is gonna trying to get to that. I remember every week being like what's this happening this week, and you would send us the little thing, that you found on that website about this is where it is this week. And
Right.
I had forgotten about that. But Yeah, and then once they got fingers and toes and scanned, and I think I can't remember. I don't remember when we found out it was a boy. Honestly, I don't know why I don't remember that. But do you remember that?
Yeah, we found out at the anatomy scan, which was about 20 weeks.
Okay.
Because at the time you guys transferred, you didn't want to know on the embryos, you didn't want to know. I don't know if you guys even knew the gender, but you didn't want to know which mom's eggs had made the embryo. You didn't want to know anything,
We
just
still don't
transfer.
know. Yeah, we still don't know. We
Yeah,
still don't know officially. No, we don't know. I mean, and we didn't want to know I don't even think it was possible to know the gender then. Or maybe it was possible, but it wasn't like an option they were offering to
gotcha.
us at the
Yeah,
time. So I was always curious about that. I would have liked to know, even now, I would like to know what the other one was, which
right,
I'm sure there's a way to find out somehow, but I don't know what the other one was.
right.
And I couldn't remember when we found out that he was a boy,
Yeah, it
but
was at the anatomy scan, 20 weeks, that you guys were able to zoom in for, which was awesome.
yeah.
So what's going on with your family during this time? Like your friends and family, at what point did you share with them, like, hey, by the way, we have a baby on the way?
So different. We took different approaches for different family members, as I guess most folks would do. My mom knew everything, and Molly's mom knew everything, all the way through the process. They were supportive because they wanted a grandchild. I think they were. This was obviously new for all of us, and nothing that anybody that had gone through. I had talked about it with some friends who'd gone through IVF, but we didn't know any. We definitely did not know anybody that had ever had a surrogate.
Right.
And so talking with our friends, they were supportive, but they were curious too because it was just such a new, you're going to do what? Okay. And there
Yeah.
was a little bit of sense of maybe judgment, for lack of a better word, is that feeling of, you know, you would get a sense that there would be less than total approval maybe, but I guess
Mhm.
all the folks who knew us well enough knew not to voice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I definitely got the feeling at times like, hesitation from people.
Hmm.
But as it went on, I think that those family members came to be, to have a different opinion of it altogether. And I remember telling my dad, and I was nervous to tell him. And I
Hmm.
remember telling him, and and Molly was like, "You have got to tell your dad before the kid gets here. This is
Yeah.
crazy."
Yeah.
Uh, so I remember when I told him, I think you were probably 4 or 5 months pregnant, and and he was funny because apparently in the horse world, surrogacy is a very common occurrence
Okay.
in
Did
the
not know that.
horse breeding world
Okay.
of people who have mares and stallions, and I didn't know this either, but apparently
Uh-huh.
it's been a thing for a long time
Yeah.
in the horse world. and,
Okay.
and he was big into horses. So he actually had a reference point for it from a science perspective that nobody else had because of
That's
that. So he was
awesome.
like, "Oh yeah, people do it all the time with horses," and I'm like, "What?" But whatever it takes to make it, be okay. And
Right.
I just think that they were all, I think there was some fear from the legal side of it. Like everybody's mind goes
Yeah.
to, well, what if this and what if that? What if she
Yeah.
doesn't like, they were expecting some kind of Lifetime
Yeah.
movie
What
or,
if I keep your child from you?
all the, every possible scenario of you could ever imagine from any kind of literally like Lifetime movies from the 80s.
She does
Um,
drugs and
all of
runs
it. Yeah.
away. Yeah. To Mexico. Yeah.
All the things. Yes.
Right. Yeah. And that's super common. And I always joke with people when I used to do matches with parents and surrogates. The parents would be saying, what if the surrogate steals our baby? And the surrogate would be saying, what if this parent doesn't come pick up their baby?
Right. Yes, yes. So we knew when you were going to deliver. We were very delicate with each other about, there's trying to find that balance between me wanting to know how you feel every single day, right?
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
also not wanting to bug you. And then at the
Yeah.
same time, you're wanting to share. And I know looking back that we were uh, finding that balance of appropriate level. But you were sweet because whenever, if I was just having a day, I'd be like, it was okay to call and say, just having a day. And you turn the heart rate monitor on for 5 minutes, make me feel better,
Yeah.
and you would.
Yeah.
So, and then you would just send them without us even asking, which I loved that because it would just save us from even because of course you want to know, right? Of course you want, but it also, you don't know where the boundaries are. You're trying to figure that out. There's not like you haven't done it before. So
yeah, you haven't done it before. It's a relationship unlike any other you've ever had and will ever have in your life. And we were a country apart. Like we were on opposite sides of the country. And so it wasn't like we saw each other every day and like became
right.
super familiar with each other and in the like hanging out way. We were just communicating a lot via text and phone and FaceTime. So yeah, it's a unique thing to navigate for sure on both sides.
And in some ways, I think I am glad now looking back that I'm not glad. I can see it's such a stressful thing to be wanting it so bad and waiting on it. It's almost like I think in some ways it would have been even harder.
Yeah.
Or I would have been even more high maintenance if you'd have been around the corner.
Yeah.
Right. Because then it'd have been like, well, let's go to lunch. Well, what if you didn't want to go to lunch, right? That day. Maybe you were like, I don't feel like going to lunch today. But then you'd have felt like but I gotta go to lunch.
Yeah.
And so that eliminated that as even an option for us, right? And it's so much easier to say, send a photo or 5 seconds of the heartbeat video was just such a easier for you,
Yeah.
So in some ways it was actually a good thing.
Right. Yeah. And finding that balance, a lot of, we were independent. We didn't have an agency to like help us with those communications. And we just figured it out as we went along, which I learned later came in handy teaching me how to own an agency and coach people through this process. So I feel proud of what we did together and how we figured it out together. It wasn't always perfect, but here we are 10 years later and we still text and, see each other as often as we can. So I think we did something right in that sense. So
I think from delivery, I came out. When did I come out? A week early?
Yeah, so delivery day.
Yeah, I had come out 2 weeks early because I was afraid you would go into labor early.
Right, because
I wanted
do the C-section at 39 weeks because he was already approaching 9 pounds at 38 weeks or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, 39 is as big as we want this boy to get. And so, yes, you came out early.
And just hung out for 2 weeks, and that was awesome. And went to the doctor's appointment with you. I remember the last doctor's appointment beforehand. Went to that, and and then the morning of, it was, and I'm sure things have changed a lot in the 10 years, but the hospital and our OBGYN was amazing, but it felt like this was new for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you remember I was having a C-section, so their hospital rule was that only one other person could be in the OR with you.
Right.
And we were like, wait, what? No. Right. And so we ended up having I had some very heated conversations with hospital management.
Yes.
Before we finally came to, I guess, a compromise where I would be in the room with you, and then Molly would be right outside, but at the window. And then at the time when it got to the point where he was going to be delivered, they'd let her come in and then go right back out. I mean, they were very stringent about it. Yes. But is that still the practice even now?
Unfortunately, yes. However, you get a lot of varying stories from hospital to hospital. Some people say it was never a question that both parents would be in there with me, as well as my husband or partner. Like all of us were in there. And then you have others that say they would not let anybody in except my husband or partner. Nobody else. Wow. No questions asked. So it runs the gamut, but unfortunately, it's still very common.
Wow. So yeah, and I mean, I think that the other, we felt our way through navigating those 2 or 3 days in the hospital. Because you don't know what you're supposed to do. Right. So we were in the hospital in one room with him, and then you're down the hall in another room. And I don't know about like what's happening or not happening hormone wise. And I want to be sensitive to that. But, like so that to me and was the hardest part to know what to do the right way of all
Mm,
of it. That was the part that I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do or not do. Like, I don't know where the lines are with that.
right, right.
Um, and that was, looking back, if there was like, a manual,
Hmm.
that would have been the section where I was like, can somebody please tell me what I'm supposed to do? Like, do we go down there and hang out? Do we not? Do we bring the baby? Do we not? What's, so.
Yeah, I know. And there is no manual, right? You just figure it out and it's person by person, situation by situation. But first, I just want to back up and play a little funny scene that I think is funny, which is the day of the C-section. We're all in the room, and there's me and my ex-wife and my mom. And then
Uh-huh.
there's you and your mom. And there's Molly, was it her cousin
Her
or her aunt?
sister,
Her
my
sister,
aunt, her
your
sister.
aunt and her sister. So there's however many women and no men in this room. And I remember the nurses coming in and saying, first they just stand there for a second and they look around at all these women and they're like, okay, mom? Like they look at me and say, mom, question mark. And then they'd say, is there a dad? And we'd be like, no, I'm the surrogate. These are the moms, plural. So they had to like process that there's a surrogate and two women and no men. And it was like every single person that walked in had to make this math calculation in their head. And it was hilarious.
It
But
was
then
hilarious
one
because
one man
between
did show up.
yes, yes. So my younger brother, um, showed up unannounced, had taken a red eye across the country and not told us, and showed up right before. I feel like it was probably like right before you got taken back.
It was, yeah.
And did you know? Had they told you? I can't remember
No,
if
I
they
had
told you.
no idea. One of the nurses came in and said, Nicole, someone's here to see you, or there's a
The
delivery
delivery or
for you.
something.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
delivery for you. Can you come out into the hallway? And we were like, I think your mom knew, and that she was the only one that knew, I
yeah,
think. And
yeah,
then you went out and then you came back in with your brother. And it was like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, it was so cool.
So there was a boatload of us. I mean, between all of us, it was a pretty hilarious scene and probably a little bit of chaos from the standpoint of the hospital because we were all packed into this pretty tiny room, and then when they take you, we get gloved up and all that gowned up and then go down, and when after you delivered we bring him back. I guess at that point we were going to be in a room and they were taking you to a different room for post op or
Right.
whatever that was.
Recovery. Yeah.
And yeah, and so like the way it was at that hospital, you never leave the baby. I never left him. I never
Right.
left the baby from the delivery. He was in my eyesight all the way back to the room and then, the bath and the whole 9 yards. So,
Right. Yeah. And
uh,
we'd also hired a photographer. So there was a female photographer in the room the whole time, too. I remember that. Yeah. We had a
that's
room full of women having one little baby. Oh, yeah. So postpartum, we ended up, once they put me in my postpartum room after the surgery room, we were actually next door to each other. And we got to like walk back. And I was up walking that same day. We got to see each other. And then we got discharged from the hospital. And you guys went back to your rental house in the town that I lived in. And we got to come over and visit and bring some breast milk those first few days. And I think you guys
right.
stayed about a week. And then instead of getting on an airplane, what did you guys decide to do to get home across the country?
So I had been told by our pediatrician that in a perfect world, she would not want him exposed to germs that, like an airplane at a week old. And there was some concern about the pressure in their ears when they're a week old.
Hmm.
Um, and so, to stay a month. And I'm like, I'm not staying a month or stay 2 more weeks or 3 more or something. I'm like, no, like what's option B?
Right.
And option B was a train across the country, which would be like a 3-day thing,
Right.
or 4 days, actually, 4-day thing. And so I did research and found that you can, get like a whatever the Mac Daddy version of a train car is.
Right. The sleeper
Um,
car.
the sleep, yeah, so I got the most deluxe of the deluxe sleeper car, which is still not that deluxe, just so you know
Right.
now. Okay. It's like the deluxe room at the Holiday Inn. All right. It's
Right.
not. And we took, we had one train for 2 days and had to change trains and then go another 2 days. And we were going to have to get on a third leg of it, only like 8 or 9 hours from home. And we were going to have to spend the night and then get on the train the next morning to finish it. And I said, I'm done with trains. And so we ended up just renting a car and driving home the last part
Oh my
because it
gosh.
was it was a bit of small room. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you guys ran out of diapers at some point on the train ride and had to like jump off the train and get diapers, or they like had to use like a tablecloth from one of the tables until you could get to a train stop with diapers.
It was the craziest thing. So we had tried to plan for this and pack for this appropriately, but with a train, you can't get access to whatever you're not going to have in your room. I'd been out there for a long time. We had all this stuff. So I'm trying to coordinate it, and somehow one of the bags that had the diapers in them, sort of extras, had gotten down below, like in storage, so you could not access it. So
Right.
we had like one bag that lasted us, and then I realized that it was not with us in our room, like 3 diapers left. And I'm like, uh-oh. And it's going to be another, at this point, like a day and a half. And so I
Right.
had to go literally find the captain of the train, the official conductor. And I was hoping they would just let me get my bag somehow.
Right.
And they were like, no, absolutely not. That's a no go. And I was like, well, then bring me some napkins. And then, of course, having to explain to this poor man why we're on a train with a baby. And
Right.
neither one of us look like we've just given birth.
Right.
Right.
Right. Oh my God.
And so after I explained it all to him, and I had to explain the whole 9 yards to him, he said, okay, there's a stop where there's a convenience store on the other side of the tracks. He said, I am not waiting. I am not changing the schedule. I will let you get off and you can run, and you got exactly this much time to get back here. And so getting up, trains are tall. You don't
Yeah.
realize it. But so they had to like throw down this ladder thing. And I climbed down the ladder and went sprinting across like 5 or 6 train lines over to like a Quick Trip. And the only thing they had in there was like diapers for like an 18-month-old. I'm like, it's better than nothing. So I
Yeah.
had this like, couple-week-old baby. And I bought out the diapers in the Quick Trip, and they were all based on an 18-month-old. So the diapers were up to his neck.
I remember
It
the
was,
pictures. They were hilarious. Oh my gosh. It's a story for his baby book for
there
sure.
you go. There you go. But how
So
was it for you? I mean, was
yeah.
the, like, looking back, was there a part of it that you tell other people, hey, I do it that you learned that we did it the wrong way, or that we did it somehow backwards?
I do tell people that I feel like escrow is a really important piece of it, because the escrow manager is a buffer for all the financial stuff. Because I just feel like it's always uncomfortable to talk about money, no matter what scenario
Right.
you're in. It's especially weird to talk about money when you're carrying a baby for someone, right? And to have to work
Right.
out the intricacies, because you and I were like the project managers the whole time. So
Sure.
I feel like it wasn't ever an issue. Like we never had any disagreements or, issues, but I always tell people escrow not only protects people, but it keeps that buffer where you don't have to talk about money. It's all handled. And so I think if I were to ever do it over again, I would 1000% have an escrow account opened and let them manage money so that you and I could just focus on pregnancy and relationship.
I
Um,
agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think that was always, that makes sense, because we never had a problem. But in my mind, I was like, man, if there was anybody if I or you were different, I could have imagined that scenario like, God, this would suck, right?
Yeah.
Like this whole like, hey, by the way, this is the date for whatever payment was next on this, and Venmo. And then there was some crazy bill that took us a while after he was born to get figured out. I can't remember what that one was with it between the insurance and yada yada, but it was we navigated it, I think, as well as anybody does or can. But it still was like, oh man, I bet this is a pain. This is a mood killer for other
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. It's stressful to worry about money and bills on top of all the other things you're going through. So escrow is a huge thing. But other than that, I feel like given the circumstances, I feel like we did a great job because here we are 10 years later with a super healthy kid and awesome kid and the cutest kid ever. And I ended up changing the trajectory of my life and starting a surrogacy agency to try and help people do it what I felt was better than it was being done in the industry at the time. And that turned out to be a really good thing, I think, in both senses. I think
I
the
love it. I love it.
justify the
When you
means.
told me you were going to start the company, I was like, oh my gosh, because it made such perfect sense to me that, to have gone through it all and, being able to take that experience. I think obviously that was probably a unique situation for your folks to be able to talk to you, knowing you've actually been through it all. And no, I loved it. I loved that, it was such a unique experience. And, I think I thought at the time, like, oh man, he's never going to meet anybody else who's had this same kind of, that he, that got here the same way. And now I don't think that's true. I think that, by the time he's in high school or college and he's talking to folks, my guess is that it will be a lot more. He will meet in his lifetime, I expect, lots of folks who got here the same way he did.
Yes.
And I remember feeling weird about that at the beginning, going, man, is he going to feel really isolated that his story is so different and he doesn't know anybody? I was imagining that he would not know anybody else that had his experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I think based on how much more common it's gotten, that my expectation is that he'll probably meet a lot of people who have very similar stories.
Yes.
So
Definitely. Yeah. So, what would you, as we wrap this up, what advice would you give to parents who are just starting the process of looking into surrogacy and, looking at it going, oh my gosh, how is this going to be possible? And what can I expect? And, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? What advice would you give to them being now a decade on the other side of it?
I know, right? I still get teary thinking about it, but I am not a OCD kind of person. I'm very happy that you have a little bit more OCD than I do. I actually wanted that in a surrogate because to me, it felt like that would be a good compliment to my personality, to have somebody that was very organized and, very conscientious and thoughtful, and it made me feel better. I think because I'm not OCD kind of person and I'm not as high anxiety in some ways, that was a benefit to me, because this can be such an overwhelming experience. If you look at it, do a list of everything you've got to do in order to get from point A to point baby, it's overwhelming. It would be an overwhelming list, especially if somebody had told me from the beginning, y'all are going to have to do 4 rounds of IVF and 2 transfers and have a surrogate that, ghost. And then you're going to have another one. She's going to be across the country and it'll be twins. And if I'd have known from the front hand all of that, I would have been so overwhelmed. But I think I made a point to just do the one thing, very much the one step at a time, and not get ahead of myself, because so much of that, almost all of that, we couldn't have predicted or planned for anyway. Right. And so I think letting folks have that, giving themselves permission to be patient with that process of it.
Right.
And it's really a lot of it is like parent training, right? Because it's like so much about learning about, there's so much stuff that you're not gonna be able to control,
Right.
right? And it's just completely out of your hands. So I think that is huge, just trusting the process to go at its own speed and its own pace and not trying to overthink the entire or over plan almost.
Right.
And
Right.
the other thing is I think I was very, and you were too, we gave each other permission to talk about the stuff that worried us or that we were concerned about or that was a big thing to us or was a big deal to us, right?
Right. Right.
Knowing that it may not be the same thing, it's not going to be a big deal to everybody else. I was, I wanted the heart rate monitor, right? Thing. I wanted to be able to just hear that there was something about it physically that was bonding for me to be able to just have that connection, having not going through the actual pregnancy of it.
Sure.
And that was a gift. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to, that wasn't included in the contract,
Yeah.
So, but you having been a mom, you knew that. And I think that we brought to it a very personal feeling and position with it. And I want people to look at it as more of a personal journey with another person than a transactional thing. Because,
Yeah.
it's
I do. I love that you're a crier. You're so sweet. I love that you're a crier. Even
I am such a crier. It's so funny.
I love it.
I used to not be. I'm like, it's just like menopause.
That's what parenthood does to you. It does. Well,
oh my gosh, I know, right?
Well, I so appreciate this chance to talk to you and revisit our journey together. And even 10 years later, it's still, I always tell people, aside from having my daughter, it's the most amazing thing I ever did in my life. So that hasn't changed, and I don't think it will.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. Again, I'm your host, Carey Flamer Powell. I want to again thank my very special guest, Nicole, for joining me for this chat today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com. If you are interested in knowing whether surrogacy might be right for you, take our easy 2-minute quiz on our website. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.